things, and I'm going, no, I want her to learn how to type independently and do literature and learn history and science like all the other kids.
We'll listen to their
I
options.
knew they were going to do it.
You know, I think that what we need to do is get around the table with everybody as a team and figure out how we can make Darcy's inclusion more successful and less stressful on everybody.
The way the law reads is that the least restrictive environment should be tried first, and that's what we've been doing with Darcy, and it works well sometimes, doesn't work well other times. But at some point, a decision may need to be made whether her primary placement should be a regular classroom or someplace else. I'm not saying we're at that stage yet. I'm not saying we'll ever get there. But we don't ultimately make all decisions based on what a parent wants. We have to look at what the child needs in meeting the IEP and the effect on the other children in the classroom. We don't want it to be a negative situation for the typical peers in the regular classroom.
So you two are what they call inclusionistas, you know, sort of fighters on the barricades for inclusion.
We've been accused of being advo-zealots with Alice in Wonderland visions, and my response to that was, yeah, you got it. I'm an idealist, and why not? It's my daughter.
Christy Oakes, on the other hand, has given up on inclusion. She's taking Tara out of the mainstream and enrolling her here at the Fletcher Miller School, a public school just for children with disabilities.
I think the worst part of this is that when I sat at Fletcher Miller the other day and listened to this wonderful program that they're going to put her in, I thought, I kicked myself because I thought, I should have done this in October. You know, I was sort of mad at myself that I didn't see this sooner. We already lost a year as far as I'm concerned. I'm not willing to sacrifice any more of Tara's school years to a cause. You know, if it worked, that would be great, but I'm not willing to sacrifice any more.
And as long as that segregated room where those kids go still is there down the hall underestimating children, as long as that room's there, it's going to be easier for them to put Darcy in it. And I'm going to say no. I'm going to say no. But that doesn't mean another parent won't say, yeah, that's great, I want my kid in there matching colors where they're going to really get that quality special stuff. I'm not saying you can't have that. That Fletcher Miller, that asylum or institution or group home is still going to be there on the hill with those separate and equal scenarios. We're not going to get rid of them overnight, but we're certainly not going to build community acceptance, full inclusion, and really do right by kids until we get rid of the alternatives that exist that separate and segregate and underestimate children.
What's interesting is you're kind of swimming against the tide, because the tide is going inclusion.
Yeah, scary.
Of course, the intent of the wait a minute, scary?
It's scary to me that those options may not be there someday. And it's scary to me for the future of the kids, because from what I've heard, in middle school they get a flood of kids that were doing fine in the mainstream, and then suddenly in middle school everything falls apart. It doesn't work anymore. And I believe someone would have to show me, you know, from what I've seen, no, it does not work in middle school.
Schools like Fletcher Miller are becoming rare. As more regular public schools attempt to include the disabled, special schools are closing. Of the 25 in Colorado 20 years ago, only 3 remain open.
Fletcher Miller School and schools like that. Do you want to close those schools?
I don't think that there's a need for those schools at this point in time. I mean, again, what we have learned, particularly with kids with severe disabilities like this, that these kids benefit much more from being around typical kids, and that there is a whole body of research out there that supports these kids being in regular schools and around typical children.
David Spinks is principal of the Fletcher Miller School.
Brian McNulty said, we don't need the schools like that. Said he'd like to close Fletcher Miller.
Mm-hmm. Brian does not speak for all the parents that I deal with. I'd love to have Brian speak to some of my parents, because many of my parents are people who have tried inclusion, whose students have actually been elsewhere. They have come to us saying they cannot meet their needs. My child is not progressing, he's regressing, academically, self-esteem-wise, and they realize they want their children to be around other children like themselves.
Oftentimes we place low expectations on kids because of either the label of disability or the severity of disability. We think that they can't do certain things. And what we have found is that they can do many things that we thought that they couldn't. So we need to change our expectations, and one of the ways that we do that is other kids set much higher expectations than we do.
Read the word.
Bus.
3 weeks later, Tara seemed happy at her new school.
The first week she was in school, she learned to read 2 new words, which blew me away because she had not been getting any reading all year. She's learning to identify coins and count money. She loves math. She never liked math before, and she loves it now because they're doing things that she can understand, and she feels like she's learning, she's accomplishing something. I got a call from a mother last night that her little girl is in Tara's class and they want her to come over and play. That may seem like a small thing to other parents, but Tara does not get invited to kids' houses. You know, even if they're nice to her at school, in the mainstream, they don't invite her over, you know. And so this was, I was thrilled.
Darcy's world also seemed to be changing after her mother met with the school to talk about plans for 3rd grade.
What's changed is that there's a lot less acceptance for inclusion in Park Hill than I thought there was. And I naively thought that we would go into yesterday's meeting and have a teacher there, not necessarily enthusiastic, but willing to be mature about this and willing to consider there might be something for everybody to learn from this experience. And instead, I showed up, and the director of special ed was there, and to tell us that nobody and the principal telling us that no teacher in the school and no paraprofessional in the school wants to work with Darcy. And I think it was unnecessary information to share with us. It's hurtful to be told these things. But what's really outrageous is that Darcy was in their room and heard that. Words like burden were used.
But we'll never know, because I'm not going to try. Whoa! Oh, God, what?
Read.
Out.
Out.
Christy Oakes, who has rejected inclusion, and the Reeds, who have embraced it, have very different expectations for their daughters.
My hopes for Darcy is that that she'll grow up and have a place of her own, that she'll live with people that she chooses to live with, that she'll be in a position to take advantages of opportunities that she sees, that she'll be able to be the person that she wants to be, that given the limitations imposed on her by nature with her disability, that she won't have to overcome a lot of extra obstacles placed in her way by society.
I'm not going to kid myself that Tara will ever live independently. And I know that her whole life she'll be exposed to other handicapped people. And I'm okay with that. I don't have a problem. I know that she also interacts well with normal people, and she has plenty of exposure to them. We certainly don't lock her up, but I think she needs to have relationships with handicapped people because those are her peers. Whether you like it or not, and I'm fine with it, those are her peers.
Find the word bus.
Christy Oakes expects Tara to remain at Fletcher Miller as long as the law allows, that is, until she's 21. Darcy Reed, however, faces a far less certain future. Because her behavior had become increasingly disruptive, she did not enter 3rd grade at Park Hill this fall. Instead, the Reeds are teaching her at home, and her classroom aide comes to their house every school day.
Where are we as a nation more than 20 years after making a commitment to educate disabled children? In one sense, the law has worked. Disabled children now have access to public schools, something they did not have before the law passed. But getting children into schools isn't good enough. The goal should be education, graduation. There, we have a long way to go. Despite the best of intentions, the special education system seems to pay more attention to policies and procedures, to rules and regulations, instead of teaching disabled children and then testing them to find out whether they're learning. The system is top-heavy with staff and doesn't provide enough help for regular classroom teachers. We have a long way to go to keep that promise. Right now, anyway, special education isn't all that special.
To learn more about this program, visit us on the PBS homepage at the address on your screen. A presentation of South Carolina ETV and Learning Matters Incorporated. The Merrill Report. What's so special about special education was made possible by the people of Toyota. And by the Annenberg Foundation, Carnegie Corporation of New York, the Pew Charitable Trusts, the Ford Foundation, and the Annie E. Casey Foundation. For a free companion guide to this program, please call 1-800-277-0829.
This is PBS.
To purchase a copy of this edition of the Merrill Report or others in the series, call 1-800-277-0829 or write to SCETV Marketing, P.O. Box 11,000, Columbia, South Carolina 29211.